when he was in the Senate and I was still in the House. Let me talk about each of those reasons, each of the reasons this needs to be a priority. And I want to spend a little bit of time on these because as you engage in your work, whether you're working on gender equity, whether you're representing CARE, One Campaign, you're looking at educational issues, healthcare issues, or economic development issues, it's important that you know, well, how do politicians think? What are the issues or the priorities or the values that are going to make them understand the importance of the work you're doing? So I want to take a time to emphasize a few, and then finally talk about where I think we need to go. The humanitarian issue. The United States is the strongest, wealthiest country in the history of the world. And given that economic strength, we've got an obligation, a moral obligation, I think, to try to help address crises that are either our allies or anyone around the globe is trying to deal with. If we can help address that with ideas, with legislation, with funding, I think we've got an obligation to do so. And at least in my lifetime, I can't think of an issue that poses a greater humanitarian crisis or humanitarian risk than HIV and AIDS. 35 million people infected worldwide. 3 million or more new infections per year. And it just has enormous human consequences. And given our wealth and our stature, this has to be a priority for us. And I can't think of anything in the realm of humanitarian assistance, human endeavor that is as important as this. And even outside of the area of HIV and AIDS, Dr. Dallaire emphasized, there's health consequences of poverty are enormous. And I always come back to the current statistic of roughly 1 million deaths from malaria a year, something that's completely preventable, completely treatable, and very inexpensive to treat. It's a good thing that treatment, that the 3-in-1 ARV treatment can be obtained now for under $200 per year. But to treat malaria, you're talking about less than $10 in many cases. And that still is 1 million deaths a year. So the humanitarian scope and the humanitarian importance of this can't be underestimated. Second is global health. And I'm not an expert in this area, but anytime you have an epidemic that's affecting 30 or 35, 40 million people around the world, and that's on the HIV side, but we have other infectious diseases like tuberculosis, and even potential infectious diseases, whether it's SARS or pandemic flu. It may not be prevalent in the United States, but the potential and the potential threat to the United States or the European Union or Asia is very, very real. So if we want to maintain a strong integrity within our for global health around the world, we need to deal with the threat of these infectious diseases wherever they might be evident. Whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Central Europe, it doesn't matter. Global health is something we should all take an interest in, because degradation in our global health system can ultimately come back to affect Americans, affect us as a country, and certainly affect for our economy. And the economy would be the third point of emphasis, why this has to be a national priority. Health crises have a direct impact on economic vitality, economic productivity. Ultimately, if we're trying to improve quality of life in the United States, we're trying to help people improve quality of life in Africa, we're trying to help people improve quality of life in Asia, we want them to have a strong economy. And it's hard to imagine how an economy can be vibrant and strong and growing if you have millions of new infections of HIV per year, if you have people suffering as a result of HIV, if you have people getting lost, millions dying every year as a result of HIV. The economic impact and consequences of those numbers are really staggering. And so if we want to help sustain and maintain a strong global economy, stronger economy in these parts of the world that are being affected by HIV and malaria and tuberculosis, we've got an obligation to act with funding levels that can really have an impact. And finally, national security. We've seen over the last 20 years the dangers that can be posed to our national security in Europe and elsewhere by failed states. The collapse of civil institutions, the collapse of security infrastructure, whether it's in a place like Afghanistan or Somalia, the dangers to the world are very, very real. Those failed states can be breeding ground for extremism, but equally dangerous, they can become a fertile ground for moving the modern weapons of terrorism. It could be people, it could be money, it could be weapons, explosives themselves. But in a failed state, a collapsed state, it's much easier to move those items that can pose risks to our national security than it would be otherwise. And there are few things that I can think of more damaging to the structures of governance, civil society, than the economic and social damage that comes from HIV and other chronic infectious diseases. Both the human toll, but also the economic consequence that I spoke about earlier. Those can really be contributors to the collapse of governance. We have made progress, and let me close by